How about that, you poor thing? I've eliminated the smell of poverty for you, so you should be grateful." With those words, champagne splashed my face with force. This occurred when I went to greet my fiancé's family. Far from being concerned about me, Jan, my fiancé, started laughing loudly as if to mock me. I quickly realized that my carefully styled hair and the clothes I was wearing had all been for naught. In the end, all I felt was emptiness. "I will therefore terminate our contract with your company." What? Upon hearing my statement, Kelly, Jan's mother, who splashed the champagne on me, and Jan himself both expressed their shock with astonishment. Before these two, who couldn't even understand what was happening, Jan's father, President Coleman, suddenly appeared. "Mr. Coleman, you had mentioned before that you plan to retire soon and hand over your duties to your son. In such circumstances, it's reasonable to reconsider how much my company can trust a future business leader. There might have been an intention to maintain our relationship through your son marrying me, but unfortunately it has backfired." After finishing all explanations, I quietly left the scene. Kelly, who had overheard my conversation with President Coleman, was too upset to say anything. Of course, this is not the end. They need to fully face the consequences of their actions. My name is Tana Hall. I am 48 years old and have never been married, remaining single all my life. I always prioritize work and cherish my alone time. Thanks to my hobbies of reading and watching movies, I have spent fulfilling days, which is why I have never developed an interest in marriage as I aged. That spring, in April, when the flowers were in full bloom, an unexpected marriage proposal came my way. The introducer was Douglas Coleman, with whom I had a business relationship. "Ms. Hall, I would very much like to introduce you to someone. How about it?" he said. Initially hesitant, I decided to meet the person after being strongly urged. That person, Jan, was the same age as me and the son of President Coleman. He is the youngest son, with several older sisters. He has come close to marriage several times before, but he remains unmarried. "I have one request, if you don't mind," I said. Our first meeting was conditional, but Jan was a polite and kind person, and I immediately took a liking to him. I started thinking that maybe it would be all right to marry him. So I suggested that we start dating. Both President Coleman and Jan were pleased with this proposal, and things started off smoothly. However, I could never have imagined that this choice would lead to an unexpected situation later on. 5 weeks into our relationship, on our third date, John said with a smile, "We're already like a couple, aren't we?" Unlike before, Jan wore a casual jacket and appeared relaxed and youthful. This time, I had switched from my previous dressed-up style to a casual pants look. Although we are both older, our feelings at that moment were as fresh as those of young people. However, as the date began, I felt something off about Jan's behavior. He often made comments that seemed condescending. For example, he took me to a slightly upscale restaurant and said proudly, "You wouldn't normally get to come to a place like this, right? It must be unusual for you." I could only respond with an ambiguous smile to his words. In fact, this restaurant is one of my favorites, and I had just visited it with a friend 3 days ago. But it would have been cruel to embarrass him on the spot, so I didn't tell him the truth. A waiter I knew nodded at my signal and pretended to be ignorant. While sitting, I noticed the watch on Jan's wrist. It wasn't a top-of-the-line item, but it was decent. "That's a different watch from before. The color is lovely, and it suits you," I complimented. Embarrassed, Jan took off the watch to show it to me. Mistaking my interest, he seemed to offer it out of kindness. Since I wasn't deeply interested, I briefly checked it and returned it, but he seemed to insist on giving it again. Feel free to take a closer look. It's not often you see something this high-end, right? No need to be shy. My reaction was not so much out of politeness as it was just a lack of interest in men's watches. Though I agreed to take it when he insisted, I felt a bit perplexed. To me, a watch is just an accessory, and I think checking the time on a smartphone is sufficient. So I mentioned his watch casually, just as I might compliment a friend's new decorative item. Many of the older people I work with wear them too, so I actually see them quite often. Thank you for showing it to me. It's nice to have something you like. At that, Jan slightly pouted and surreptitiously followed my belongings with his gaze. What caught his interest was a bag that I am particularly fond of. This bag was specially made for me at a favorite workshop, reflecting the craftsman's skill and my taste, and is very practical. It's a bit pricey, but it seemed cheap to Jan. I was wondering, don't you have a proper bag? Instead, I think you should have something more prestigious. The bag was custom made at an Italian bag store and naturally doesn't have a brand logo. In fact, the Craftsman's Workshop logo is branded on the bottom of the bag. However, I prefer simple designs above all, so I asked to hide it. It would be difficult for someone not accustomed to women's bags to judge its price just by looking. But I can't help but be puzzled by his consistently superior tone. Sometimes I dismiss it, accepting that he's a sheltered son who doesn't know the world, but the feeling of discomfort doesn't easily go away. At one point, I thought about reconsidering marriage, but since we've only met 3 times, it seemed too hasty to decide on a separation. So, I decided to wait and see how things would unfold. Since then, we have continued dating. Jan does show some immaturity at times, but he is essentially an honest person. He no longer exhibits the unnatural behavior he showed before. No one is perfect from the start. If you have patience and gradually find harmony, love will eventually grow, said an older female celebrity on a show I watched for distraction. I found some truth in those words. The following week, we went to a famous hotel buffet for our 5th date. Strangely, Jan piled 3 or 4 servings of food onto his plate. "Are you sure it's okay to take so much? It would be a waste if you can't finish it," I lightly commented, to which he suddenly burst into laughter. Wondering what was so funny, he said, "A waste? Tana, are you still talking like someone poor? It's okay to take this much, it doesn't matter if I throw it away if I can't eat it all." I made a sour face. It seemed he completely failed to understand that wasting food not only incurs costs but also discomforts other customers. The issue isn't just about money, it's about resources and the environment. Aren't you aware of the concept of food waste? It's also inconsiderate to other customers, and eating disorderly isn't good. My voice carried more sternness than usual. In response, Jan suddenly shrank back. As he poked at his pasta with a fork, he muttered, "I'm sorry, please don't be angry. My mommy said you might be marrying me for money, and I just reacted without thinking." The word mommy lingered in my ears, and I inadvertently repeated it. Referring to one's mother as mommy is uncommon and suggested a peculiarity about his family environment. As the date neared its end, with this discomfort in mind, Jan drove me home, and as I was getting out of the car, he grabbed my hand to stop me. "Ms. Hall, even though I am who I am, would you marry me? Even if not right away, being engaged is fine. As your fiancé can wait as long as it takes." I was taken aback by Jan's sudden forwardness. but soon I began to feel genuine joy from his actions. Although there are many concerning aspects about Jan, his courtship brought pure joy. I considered that the areas he lacks could be improved upon after marriage, nurturing him into a loving husband. 3 months had passed since we met, and I felt it was the right time to move forward. Let's grow together by complementing each other. We both have flaws and differences, so let's talk a lot and resolve them, I said with teary eyes, moved by emotion. However, the moment I agreed to the proposal, Jan once again exhibited problematic behavior. Let's start preparing for married life. First, you should quit your job and take care of the home and learn the housework from my mommy. He began with a smile. My joy vanished, replaced by rising anger. I countered him more strongly than usual. Don't be so presumptuous. If that's your attitude, then marriage is out of the question. Goodbye, I said. Jan was silent, stunned. During that moment, I got out of the car and immediately went back into my house. Though I had decided to distance myself, I reluctantly agreed to meet after receiving a message from Jan over the weekend, insisting on seeing me. The weekend came quickly, and Jan was already waiting at our meeting place when the appointed day arrived. As I approached, Jan stood up quickly and apologized deeply. I'm really sorry about last time. My friends told me to lay down the law, and I took it seriously. They even scolded me for actually thinking it's okay to do that. Jan said, his energy low, which soon began to dissolve my anger. Just a while ago, I felt like clicking my tongue at him, but ultimately I came to terms with it. It's somewhat disappointing, but he is dear to me. Jan is very straightforward, and sometimes it might be hard for him to distinguish between jokes and seriousness. He is easily influenced and somewhat indecisive. But I reminded myself that no one is perfect from the start. Make sure you keep this in mind. We're getting engaged, after all, I said with a wry smile. At those words, Jan looked up suddenly and brightened immediately. After a stormy engagement period, a month had passed. Finally, it was time to formally meet each other's families to announce our marriage. The first visit was to Jan's family home. Although I have had a long association with President Coleman, it was strictly professional, and this was my first time visiting his home, which was nerve-wracking. Jan was as gentle and lovely as usual, but he seemed a bit off since the morning of the visit. I thought he might be nervous, but apparently that wasn't the case. About my mom? He started, and I braced myself, thinking of the potential issues between a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. However, I believed in his mother, known to be a hard-working woman and the kind-hearted wife of President Coleman. I hoped that if I spoke sincerely she would understand, but I was mistaken. Yikes. The moment I stepped into the room where we were supposed to greet each other, liquid splashed onto my face. My eyes hurt intensely. Further, a strong irritation hit my nose, causing me to cough violently. I immediately panicked. How about that, you poor thing? I got rid of the poor smell for you, so be thankful, I heard a mocking voice say. I was surprised by the bitter taste, smell, and heat. I realized the liquid that entered my mouth was champagne, but I was confused about why I received such treatment. Kelly, what are you doing? President Coleman exclaimed in shock. The situation became clear. Jan's mother and my future mother-in-law, Kelly, had thrown champagne in my face. It seemed the earlier mocking voice was also Kelly's. I remembered how Jan had previously looked down on me as poor. I realized that this attitude might have come from Kelly. Ahaha. What's the matter, Tana? You're all wet. Funny, isn't it? Go mommy, typical of you. Jan laughed loudly. At that moment, I realized that everything up to this point had been in vain. Only emptiness piled up in my heart. I will therefore terminate our contract with your company. What? At my statement, Jan and Kelly both exclaimed in surprise. They hurriedly looked at each other and seemed to be discussing something in whispers. Whether it was about our business dealings or something else, I was not involved as an outsider. I merely speculated about their conversation. At that moment, there was one person who remained quietly. That was President Coleman, who, without a word, looked pale and wide-eyed. I turned to him again, thanked him, and began to speak. First of all, President Coleman, I would like to thank you for your cooperation so far. It must be due to the condition we agreed upon that such an incident did not occur before. Then, when I turned to speak to Kelly and Jan, Kelly looked at President Coleman with a doubtful expression and then stared at me sternly. Meanwhile, Jan watched Kelly's reaction while looking at me. I continued quietly. This may be an unexpected statement for them, but I hope they listen carefully. One condition of accepting the matchmaking was that I would not reveal I am the president of a company until the marriage was decided. I thought my title might get in the way. My connection with President Coleman was born out of significant business transactions that I had built over the years while focusing on my business. I picked up my business card. Naturally, it listed my company name and position. Those not involved in management might not know the details of our transactions, but they would at least understand the title. Hello again, Mrs. Kelly. Thank you for all your help so far. This is my position. I have been working with your husband's company for over 10 years. Currently, my company is probably your biggest client. I wonder what percentage of your company's sales we represent. When I handed over my business card, Jan turned pale with surprise. He worked in his father's company, and seeing my company name should have made it clear who I was. To President Coleman, I am not just any business owner. I am the owner of one of his most important business partners. Therefore, I wanted my profession hidden initially to truly assess Jan's character. When choosing a lifelong partner, I want to see the real person, not just superficial behavior. I cannot afford a contrived attitude because it could affect the fate of a parent's company. Thus, I was introduced merely as someone I met through work. I wore fake glasses and significantly altered my makeup and hairstyle for our dates. While the disguise served as a temporary amusement, in retrospect, it was a waste of time. I'm sorry, President Coleman, but I must decline this proposal. This concerns marriage, and also, we need to pause our transactions to reassess the situation I stated, then sat down to face President Coleman. Afterwards, I explained the situation as calmly as possible. President Coleman turned pale upon hearing my words and stuttered, "The transactions are affected? That can't be right," but his reaction seemed forced. I shook my head firmly, indicating that my decision was final. However, wanting him to understand that my decision was not based on a fleeting emotion, I continued in a calm voice. President Coleman, you mentioned before about planning to retire soon and hand over your responsibilities to your son. In such circumstances, it makes sense to reconsider how trustworthy a future business partner can be. There might have been an intention to maintain our relationship through your son marrying me, but unfortunately, it has backfired. Right after graduating from university, I started my own company with some friends. Over 20 years have passed since then, and I have been leading the business as its president throughout that time. As I've mentioned several times, I have built a relationship with President Coleman's company over more than a decade. My company, managed from a female perspective, has been recognized for its unique approach and has been growing significantly recently. As a result, our transactions with President Coleman's company have also increased. However, recently there has been internal discussion about whether to switch to new business partners. Amidst this situation, the sudden proposal of an arranged marriage came up. Considering the timing, President Coleman might have sensed some movement from our company. This was not particularly kept secret. After finding out who I am, Kelly and Jan were clearly disturbed. I decided to explain the situation further to them. In fact, we were reviewing whether to continue our transactions with your company. I heard that your company is currently facing some management difficulties. Are you aware of that? As contracts with other partners are ending, this information is crucial. What does that mean? Kelly asked, shocked, while frantically shaking President Coleman's arm. Beside her, President Coleman wiped his sweat in a flustered manner, looking anxious. It seems that the company's issues have not been discussed within the family. Jan's glances between me and President Coleman caught my attention. Despite being an insider, Jan appeared not to understand the current state of his own company. While considering this puzzling situation, I continued the conversation. In light of this, President Coleman strongly suggested for me to meet up with you, Jan, leading us to this point. Perhaps you considered this marriage proposal with the stability of your company in mind. It seems you wish to maintain our business relationship at all costs. Kelly was visibly shaken, her hands trembling and her lips quivering. As I explained, President Coleman's company is indeed struggling with management issues. Kelly may have looked down on me earlier, but her company is facing far more significant problems. Once praised for quality and speed, President Coleman's products have been technologically overtaken by competitors, no longer offering anything special. Moreover, the development and manufacturing processes are inefficient, cost reduction has not progressed, and the product prices have become expensive. Additionally, the company imposes unacceptable levels of pressure on employees under modern labor standards, shortening delivery times and further deteriorating the corporate reputation. Adopting products from a low-rated company can cause a domino effect, dragging down the reputation of business partners. Even a company with a long history faces challenges with outdated structures and a high turnover rate among young employees. As a result, President Coleman's company's market share has gradually decreased, and its performance continues to decline. Under such circumstances, it was natural for us to explore transactions with other stable companies. How dare you threaten to cut off business based on personal feelings? What a despicable act. Are you blackmailing us? This is the worst. Don't think such behavior is acceptable, Kelly exclaimed in outrage. Despite her actions being the cause, I was surprised by her accusatory behavior. The lack of an initial apology speaks volumes about her character. Before I could point this out, President Coleman shouted vehemently, "Silence. This is all your fault." I swallowed what I was about to say. Indeed, it is likely that President Coleman, not I, is the most damaged party here. The unexpected fallout from his wife's inappropriate behavior would have been unforeseen for him, who had hoped for stability. All of this stems from President Coleman's actions to faithfully adhere to our agreement, but in reality, keeping it a secret from Jan alone would have been sufficient. He should have informed his wife beforehand. As a result, I am relieved that I didn't have to welcome such a problematic person as my mother-in-law. The sight of Jan was pitiful. He was pale and trembling, tightly gripping Kelly's hand. It is sad to see a 48-year-old man still needing his mother's hand. Seeing his state, I couldn't help but give him a cold look. "It's impossible that you," carrying such a cheap-looking bag, could be a president. Moreover, you complained about food waste and acted like you were poor. You are lying, even about being my father's business partner. How disgraceful." Jan vehemently accused me. "He might be trying to blame me, but he is mistaken. I am not interested in branded goods and prefer to use high-quality domestic leather products. Also, my criticism of wasting a large amount of ordered food was not because I am poor, but simply because it is inappropriate behavior. There can be no calculated acting in this. Regarding this bag, it is custom-made from a workshop I frequent. Anyone knowledgeable would recognize its quality immediately, but it seems none of you are interested in the quality of leather. This bag is priced higher than commercial brands," I explained, and suddenly Kelly stared at my shoes and bag with astonishment. Then she quickly averted her gaze, embarrassed. "Clearly, it's a matter of those who know, understand," I continued. "Furthermore, ordering a large amount of food and not being able to finish it is not only wasteful but also disrespectful to the restaurant. It is unreasonable and inappropriate behavior. Moreover, the fact that I am your father's business partner is true. What would it mean if the presidents of the companies doing business with each other did not know one another?" Jan seemed dissatisfied and unconvinced by this discussion. President Coleman frowned at his son's behavior. When we confirmed that we knew each other, Jan looked down without a word. His clinging to Kelly appeared extremely childish and out of place for his age. Faced with his immaturity, I couldn't help feeling how disappointed I was. "If your company abandons us, we will be on the brink of bankruptcy. Please forgive us." President Coleman began to apologize profusely. This clear statement from him seemed to finally make Kelly realize the situation. Realizing the gravity of his actions, Jan turned pale and began to tremble. "Mommy," he said with tears in his eyes, clinging to Kelly in his distress. However, Kelly was unable to respond in any way. Witnessing this scene, I breathed a deep sigh of relief from the bottom of my heart. I deeply regretted ever considering sharing my life with such a person. Thinking that because he was honest, I could correct him and make things better, now seems like a naive thought in retrospect. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." President Coleman repeated his apologies over and over without actually proposing how to address the situation or how to make them reflect. This could easily lead to severing ties on an emotional basis. Therefore, I was forced to make specific remarks about the engagement. "Let's address our engagement. I cannot consider marrying someone whose mother behaves so rudely. Moreover, he did not try to stop his mother and even laughed along with her. I hope you understand why the engagement should be called off." President Coleman listened, repeating words of affirmation. I continued the conversation. "Thank you for understanding. Until yesterday, I believed in Jan's potential for improvement and proceeded with the engagement, but now I feel relieved that our relationship has been dissolved. Furthermore, I provided specific examples of Jan's behavior. For instance, his frequent quoting of his mother's opinions, saying, "Mommy said so," and then his behavior of calling his mother mommy at nearly 50 years of age. He often uses his mother's opinions as a shield to justify his improper behavior. However, his weakness becomes apparent as soon as I point out these issues. He quickly becomes disheartened. There were countless examples of these behaviors. President Coleman was astonished, his mouth agape. Kelly also showed embarrassment. However, Jan himself seemed not to understand what part of his behavior was problematic. Regarding calling off the engagement, "Is there any fault on my part?" I asked. President Coleman shook his head, almost imperceptibly. His actions seemed pitiful. I paused to calm myself and took a deep breath. I will divorce my wife. Jan will also have to move out with her. The company's operations will be taken over by competent staff, so please do not abandon us. Help us. It appeared that my deep breath had made President Coleman anxious, and he suddenly began to declare his intention to divorce Kelly. What? That's not possible. I can't manage my life without this marriage. Kelly cried out in shock. After that, Jan and Kelly both raised their voices at President Coleman. Why didn't you tell us beforehand? I am innocent. Why am I being kicked out? The problem is only with Mommy. I am not involved. Their simultaneous protests stirred up the room. Becoming fed up with everything, I finally let out a real sigh. Well, as you wish. Thank you for your time. I will take my leave now, I said to President Coleman alone and quickly left. I needed to go home and take my high-quality clothes to the dry cleaners right away. Otherwise, the champagne stains would set and render them unwearable. Jan stopped his protest and wept, seemingly accepting the situation. Kelly tried to retort but was silenced by a stern reprimand from President Coleman. However, she still appeared to grit her teeth in dissatisfaction, looking far more determined than her son. 5 months after the unpleasant incident with the 3 members of the Coleman family, as predicted, President Coleman resigned from his position. It was not just a retirement, but a resignation taking responsibility for the deteriorating performance of the company. The main reason for the decline in performance was the termination of the contract with our company. A former subordinate who took over as the new president conducted a comprehensive review of the operations. Breaking away from family management was well received, and external evaluations improved. He was proactive in developing new products, and the results were beginning to show. At this rate, resuming the interrupted transactions might be imminent. Furthermore, President Coleman and Kelly officially divorced. Jan moved out with Kelly as anticipated and started a new life together, but rumors persist of daily conflicts between them. The once close relationship between mother and son might have been based primarily on financial comfort. After being expelled from his father's company, Jan quickly fell into unemployment. Unable to bear Jan's financial dependence, Kelly left him in President Coleman's care and disappeared herself. I heard she now lives alone in an old, low-rent apartment, mourning her fate. Kelly once boasted of her lavish lifestyle, but it seems her behavior actually pushed many people away. Now, she has neither helpers nor friends and has become a lonely figure. About a year after President Coleman's retirement, I had a chance encounter with the former president. When I visited his former company, I unexpectedly ran into him. I am very sorry for the great inconvenience I caused before former President Coleman said. He had generously transferred half of his property to Kelly. However, the main reasons for her financial troubles were Jan's demands and Kelly's continued extravagant spending. Unfortunately, this is nothing but personal responsibility, and sympathy is hard to come by. Former President Coleman initially planned to keep Jan at a distance. However, he was shocked to learn that his nearly 50-year-old son did not even know how to boil water, and eventually, they ended up living together. He seems to be firmly educating Jan, including making various decisions within the household, as Jan had completely depended on Kelly. I feel that I have not properly looked after my son and wife until now. This is the misfortune I created for myself. Although it's late, I am deeply reflecting. I think I also did some wrong things to Kelly. Fortunately, the company did not go bankrupt, and I am relieved. said the retired President Coleman. Now staying at home, he is seriously engaging with Jan for the first time. Jan, facing unprecedented challenges with household chores and part-time jobs despite his age, seems to frequently cry. I can only hope that he becomes a decent person. However, I myself do not wish to have any more dealings with him ever again. 3 years have passed since then, and my company is doing very well. My performance has improved compared to before, and the stock price has also risen. Regarding my personal situation, I am no longer considering marriage. I had already informed my parents when I got engaged, and I explained everything thoroughly when the engagement was dissolved. When I shared the details, they supported my decision to stay single rather than approving my involvement with such a person. As a result, my parents have become even stronger supporters of my dedication to my work. I work actively every day and have taken up new hobbies to lead a more fulfilling life. Although I previously preferred indoor activities, I decided to take up exercising at the gym. Recently, I can visibly see muscles starting to form. My subordinates look at me with admiration, which is quite a ticklish feeling. I always believe that happiness is something you grab for yourself. I seek happiness that I create on my own, not just the happiness that comes from being with someone else. If I were to fall in love again in life, I would prefer it to be towards the end of my life. At life's end, I feel that one can afford to throw everything away for love. However, that's not a concern for now. Currently, my days are fulfilling, and I am happy. My life has just begun, and I continue to strive towards a bright future. Candace, I've come to ask you for a favor. I can't work with this arm, and I'm currently on leave from my part-time job. Without working, I don't get paid, and life is tough. Could you possibly lend me some money for living expenses? My husband and mother-in-law made false claims and demanded money from me. I believed them and wanted to help, so I provided the money as they requested. However, my husband was having an affair, and my mother-in-law was indulging in gambling, using the money I had struggled to gather for their entertainment. I felt pathetic beyond words when faced with this betrayal. When I confronted them with the facts, they reacted with outrage. Unable to bear it any longer, when I decided to divorce, they insulted me. If you get divorced, you'll never be able to marry again. You're just a junior high school graduate. Now we'll be free from the unpleasant daughter-in-law. I don't mind if you divorce. Faced with my husband and mother-in-law's ruthless comments, I felt that divorce alone was not a solution. I couldn't forgive this betrayal. I planned to make them pay for the suffering they caused me. My name is Candace. I am 25 years old, and it has been 3 years since I got married. My husband, Peter, works at an apparel shop. We met when he visited the family restaurant where I was working as a part-time waitress. Have you been working here long? Yes, for about 5 years now. You've been here a long time? I always see you, so I feel familiar. Would you like to go somewhere with me next time? Surprised by his unexpected invitation, I accepted it. Having had no deep interactions with the opposite sex and living a lonely life, my heart wanted to experience youthful days. I grew up with my mother, as my father had already left us following an affair that led to my parents' divorce. My mother was a single mom and couldn't afford luxuries, but she did everything she could for me. When it was time for me to advance to high school, my mother fell ill and couldn't work, so I gave up studying and decided to support our household with my part-time job. A few years later, I met my husband, an older man. He seemed mature and was attractive to me. He took me to various places, and each time I was touched. Where shall we go next time? The seaside is nice, and a spa trip would be fun?
Right.
Since I hadn't experienced much, such plans were very fresh and exciting. My husband always invited me to new worlds, like a prince out of a storybook. Enchanted by the illusion of an ideal life, I decided to marry him just 6 months after we started dating. My mother warned me that it was too early to marry, but perhaps out of guilt for not being able to let me fully enjoy my youth, she didn't oppose it too strongly. My mother had fully recovered and resumed her previous job. My husband was also the only son from a single-parent family, which may have played a role in our decision to marry. When I first met my mother-in-law, she was very pleasant and kind, but I somehow felt uneasy and developed an aversion to her. I discussed this issue with my husband. Don't worry about it. I was also nervous when I first met your mother. You'll get used to it over time. If there's a problem, I'll support you, so don't worry. His comforting words calmed my heart. However, at that point, I still did not understand his true character. After we got married, we bought a condo. Rather than paying rent every month, it's smarter to buy a condo and pay for the mortgage. It will ultimately become an asset. That's true. Since you, Candace, have more work experience than me, it'll be easier for the mortgage to get approved in your name. Then let's do that. I was genuinely happy to be able to live with my husband and followed his suggestion without any doubt. When we started our life together, I was asked to take on night shifts at work. I'm the type who can't say no, so I reluctantly agreed. As a result, despite being newlyweds, our time together was almost non-existent. One holiday, our days off coincided, and we were relaxing at home. Hey, I'm sorry to ask this, but could you lend me some money? What happened? Why do you suddenly need money? My husband started explaining with a serious look. The sales at the store have dropped, and my salary has been cut. I couldn't tell you right away. That must have been tough. I'll pay you back once my salary is back to normal. Understood. But we're a couple, so there's no need to strain yourself. Sorry, do you still have savings? Yes, just a little. But don't worry, I'm making more with the night shifts. I'll cover for you, Peter. That really helps. However, I continued to support my husband financially, and I eventually lost track of how much I had lent him. Originally, there should have been no problem, but suddenly my mother-in-law visited. Susan, what brings you here? I noticed the bandage wrapped around her arm and asked in surprise. Candace, I fell down the stairs and broke my right arm. Oh, are you okay? Have you talked to Peter about this? No, I don't want to worry him unnecessarily, so I haven't told him yet. I see. It must be hard to stand and talk here. Please come inside. We sat down in the living room and began our conversation. Candace, I've come to ask you for a favor. I can't work with this arm, and I'm currently on leave from my part-time job. Without working, I don't get paid, and life is tough. Could you possibly lend me some money for living expenses? Me? Yes, there are circumstances I can't discuss with Peter. You're the only one I can ask, Candace. If there are circumstances she can't discuss with Peter, then it can't be helped. I decided to give her $2,000 for living expenses, in the hope that lending money to her would improve our relationship a bit. I had been giving the extra money from my night shifts to my husband, so I had no choice but to take out money from my savings to give to my mother-in-law. This was honestly quite difficult. Even when I was tired, I tried to minimize expenses by cooking for myself and preparing lunch for my husband regularly, and sometimes I just ate instant food or skipped meals altogether. During such a frugal period, while cleaning the house, I found an unfamiliar strand of blonde hair. It clearly wasn't mine or my husband's. I was greatly disturbed. This could only be a sign of my husband having an affair, and it seemed he had brought someone into our home while I was at work. I was distraught and desperately searched for more evidence of his cheating. Then, I found a pay slip. Checking how much his salary had been cut, I discovered that there had been no reduction at all. In fact, it was higher than the amount he had previously mentioned to me. I was shocked twofold by my partner's infidelity and the deceit about his salary. Not knowing whom to turn to for advice, I headed to my mother-in-law's house. Thinking about the money I had lent her, I was convinced that my mother-in-law would be on my side. As I approached her house, I couldn't believe my eyes. My mother-in-law emerged from a casino. "Susan, what are you doing here?" She looked a bit startled, but asked calmly, "Huh? Candace, why are you here? I came to talk to you." "But you were playing slots. Being alone at home gets depressing." "So, I was just taking a little break." "But you're supposed to be out of money."
Right.
"I only used a little." "That money is the money I lent you, isn't it?" "No, it was just a little left over from my last paycheck. I'm using the money you lent me gratefully for this month's living expenses." I couldn't believe her, but the issues with my husband were more severe, so I avoided further probing. "Candace, I ended up having to take leave from work for the rest of the month, so I will have no salary next month. Could you possibly lend me some money for next month's living expenses?" Her lies were evident. She no longer had a brace on her right arm. Yet, I made a deliberate decision to lend her money to maintain a favorable position with her. "Of course. But can we talk for a bit?" "Thank you, Candace. You really are understanding. It's such a relief." She was pleased, and we immediately proceeded to her house. Once inside, I told her everything about my husband. Men always cheat. "I experienced a lot when I was young. Why don't you try fighting back, Candace?" Her inappropriate suggestion shocked me. "As for the money, I'm not too sure. I haven't spoken to Peter recently. But maybe watch a bit longer? He'll surely pay everything back at once." Her irresponsible comment left me speechless. "So, can I borrow the money for next month's living expenses today? I have some payments coming up." "What? Today? Could you come back in a week at night?" That's fine." A week later was my day off, and I planned to confront my husband in front of my mother-in-law then. A week later, the day arrived. I eagerly awaited my husband and mother-in-law at our home, and she arrived first. "Candace, I'm here." "Susan, please come in. It's okay right here. I'll leave as soon as I get the money. I shouldn't overstay my welcome in a newlywed's home." She stated this hesitantly, but her true interest was clearly just the money. It seems her desire to see her son had also faded. "Susan, you no longer need that arm brace, do you? Then there should be no problem meeting Peter. He'll be back soon, so please wait in the living room. I'll give you the money secretly so that Peter doesn't know, so don't worry." Yes, I might as well see Peter after a long time. I invited her over to use her to confront my husband. If she leaves now, the plan falls through. If she's using me, I need to use her to protect myself. She quietly sat in the living room drinking coffee, seeming uncomfortable with the idea of staying long. Then my husband returned home. On my days off, he always returned home at a specific time, as if to implicitly claim he's not cheating. "I'm home." "Welcome back." "Your mother is here too." Peter, it's been a long time. Mom, what are you doing here so late? Just came to see how you and Candace are doing. Really? That's unusual. First, sit down. I'll prepare some coffee. I made coffee, and the three of us sat down in the living room. Despite it being a rare reunion, my husband and mother-in-law barely spoke. Even if there was nothing to talk about, such silence was unusual. It seems their interest in each other had faded. However, this silence provided me an environment conducive to bringing up the main topic. Actually, there's something I need to confirm with you. Since your mother is here, I'd like her to hear it too. What do you want to ask? At that moment, I took out the strand of blonde hair and showed it to them. What is this? Peter suddenly changed his color. I don't know, maybe it's someone else's hair. He was clearly irritated. I found this when I was cleaning your room. Well, I deal with many people at work, so it must have stuck to my clothes. I resolved to ask him directly. Are you cheating on me? What? Of course not. Are you doubting me just because of that? It's not just the hair. There are other pieces of evidence too. I intentionally tested him. In fact, there was no other evidence. However, I intuitively felt that he was being unfaithful, though baselessly. What other evidence do you have? Be specific. I found it inconvenient to be pursued, so I quickly changed the subject. Also, your salary hasn't been cut, has it? I found the pay slip while cleaning. Why are you looking at that without permission? First, I want the money I've lent you so far back. Why all of a sudden? You know I can't pay it back. Didn't you say yourself not to strain ourselves because we're family? I didn't lend you money so you could use it for cheating. I'm not using it for cheating. So, you admit to cheating. That's a dirty trick. Your method. Ultimately, Peter had been unfaithful. Any remaining affection I had for him had disappeared. Ignoring Peter's reaction, I focused on his mother. Susan, if I can't collect the money from Peter, I can't lend you any. Candace, that's not fair. I came all this way for the money. That's cruel. Clearly, both Peter and his mother were only thinking of themselves. It seemed no problem to them that the son was borrowing money from his wife without the mother's knowledge, or that he was having an affair. Perhaps these two saw marriage as an opportunity to use me. I was preparing to make a decision as the situation worsened. I can no longer live with you. I am filing for divorce. Peter and his mother could not hide their surprise at these words. If you divorce, you'll never be able to marry again. So, you've always looked down on me like that? Yes, because you're just a junior high graduate. How does educational background affect marriage? Despite expecting such a reaction, Peter's insults shook me. Candace, calm down. Susan, you only want my money, right? That's not true. I can't lend you any more money. I also need you to return the $2,000 I lent you before. What will you do? My mother-in-law wore an indescribable expression. If that's the case, fine. I have no further business here, so I was just an ATM to you after all. My mother-in-law sighed as if she was fed up. I'll finally be free from this unpleasant daughter-in-law. I don't mind if you divorce. She suddenly changed her tone and expressed her displeasure. Peter appeared uninterested, looking at his cell phone. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. With those words, I left the pre-prepared divorce papers in front of Peter. You had this prepared. I've already filled out my part. It just needs your signature. I'll come to pick it up tomorrow. Peter and his mother looked at the divorce papers expressionlessly. Without saying anything, I hurried out of the house and went straight to my parents' house. I'm back. What happened? Why are you alone at this late hour? Mom, it seems I rushed into marriage. I should have listened to your advice. What exactly happened? I explained everything to my mother. So that's what was happening. I should have opposed it more. I'm really sorry. No, but I'm not just going to end it with a divorce. I'll definitely get back the money I lent them, and I'll seek appropriate compensation. But do you have evidence of his infidelity and debt? It's okay. I felt that it might turn out this way today, so I recorded all our conversations earlier. I proudly showed the recorder to my mother. Thinking of that, you're quite something. Yes, sadly, my prediction came true. I'll consult a lawyer tomorrow. Indeed, you can't let what happened just pass. If there's anything I can help with, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, Mom. Is it okay if I stay here for a while? Of course. This is your home. I really appreciate it. That night I couldn't sleep, filled with humiliation and disappointment. The next day I went to my house to retrieve the signed divorce papers and check that Peter had signed them. Immediately after, I went to the condo management company to proceed with the sale. Fortunately, since the title was in my name, the process went smoothly. I had no intention of living in that house any longer and felt no need to inform Peter. The property was mine, bought and paid for by me. There was no reason to let my estranged husband live there anymore. Concurrently, I hired movers to remove the household items, all of which I had purchased and therefore owned. A few days after the move, my husband called, shocked to find the house empty. What's going on? The TV and fridge, everything's gone. Since I paid for everything myself, why should I leave them there for you? Never set foot in this house again. Your belongings are no longer here. His response was as predictable as it was agitated. However, the matter was far from over. A few days later, it seemed the condo manager had visited my husband. Then he called again. What are you doing? Why did you sell the condo? You took the TV too, didn't you? That house is mine. The condo was in my name, and I made all the payments. It's only natural for me to sell it since I no longer plan to live there. Don't be stupid. Where am I supposed to live now? That's not my problem. Why don't you go live with your affair partner? This isn't a joke. I won't forgive you. His words sounded lawless. How could he think to continue living in a condo he never paid for? It was incomprehensible. And then, the ultimate retaliation. I demanded compensation from my husband and asked my mother-in-law to repay the money I had lent her with interest. The day the invoice arrived, an angry call came from my husband. Hey, what is this? Why such a high claim? I am asking for compensation because of your infidelity. Please pay it soon. There's no reason I should pay. That amount is insane. You don't even have any proof, do you? If you need proof, I have it. I've recorded all our recent conversations with your mom, and your admission of infidelity in those recordings will serve as evidence. No way, you recorded it. Yes, I couldn't trust you anymore. If necessary, I can access the condo building's elevator surveillance footage to identify the visitors, likely while I was working night shifts. Furthermore, I've been recording all our calls. Recently you said, "This won't end here," which could be considered a threat. I plan to claim additional compensation. All right, it was a mistake. I won't contact you again. After that, he hung up and there was no more contact from him. Although my mother-in-law did reach out, expecting my husband would say something, I didn't respond. This decision backfired as she called repeatedly. Finally, when I answered, she screamed at me, "So you finally pick up, you terrible daughter-in-law." It seemed she hadn't received any information from my husband. Listen, I have recorded this call and all recent calls. The fact that I lent you $2,000 and your acknowledgement of it are all recorded. Denying it now is pointless. Why not just pay me back honestly? Hearing this, my mother-in-law ended the call without a word. Perhaps she realized that arguing was futile. For me, it wasn't about the money, it was about exacting revenge on these contemptuous family members. As a result, my husband lost the condo and had to return to his mother's house. After being ousted from the condo, it seems his affair partner also abandoned him. Despite reaching out to various people, including co-workers, clients, and business partners, the revelation of his infidelity damaged his reputation. He eventually lost his job and had to take up multiple part-time jobs at a much lower salary. This was the result of misusing his wife's money. He is now working day after day to pay the compensation, having lost his job and been deserted by his former lover. My mother-in-law, too, had to stop gambling and started working part-time to pay the compensation I demanded. Fortunately, the persistent contact from my husband and his family ceased, and I now enjoy peaceful days. With the night shifts fully staffed, I was moved to day shifts. During this time, the manager called me in. "I appreciate your support during the night shifts. You've really supported the store, thank you. The higher-ups have noticed, and there's an offer for a full-time position. How about taking this chance to work as a full-time employee?" Transitioning from part-time work that I've been doing for a long time to a full-time position was a very welcome proposal. I feel young and the future looks promising, since I've risen from nothing with a middle school education to now being engaged in fulfilling work as a full-time employee.